It was supposed to be a night like any other in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. A quiet college town. Students studying, teammates preparing for the next big game, and one young woman, bright, talented, determined, was dreaming of a future bigger than the world she had come from. Her name was Tina Stewart, a 21-year-old rising star on the Middle Tennessee State University basketball team. She was the first in her family to attend college, a symbol of hope and a promise of what dedication could achieve. But behind the closed doors of her off-campus apartment, tension was growing. Two young women, two different worlds, one shared space that had become anything but safe. On March 2, 2011, that tension would finally explode. And by the end of the night, one of them would never walk out alive. This isn't just another campus dispute. This is a story of ambition and rivalry, of fear and rage, of how the smallest spark can ignite a tragedy no one saw coming. Tonight, we unravel the shocking murder of Tina Stewart, an athlete, a daughter, a dreamer, whose life was stolen in the very place she should have felt safe. And before we begin, ask yourself this: how many stories like Tina's are buried in silence, forgotten until the next tragedy strikes? Don't let them disappear. Subscribe to Unraveling Crimes now, because the story you hear today could be closer to you than you think. Tina Stewart was born and raised in Memphis, Tennessee. To her family, she wasn't just another child. She was the one who carried their hopes, the one who would rise higher. Tina's journey was never about privilege. It was about perseverance. She was the first in her family to attend college, a dream many around her never got the chance to chase. From an early age, Tina found her gift. On the basketball court, she wasn't just good, she was unstoppable. Coaches saw her as a natural leader. Teammates admired her drive. Every layup, every sprint, every practice was another step closer to the life she envisioned. Basketball wasn't just a game. It was her way out, her future, her proof that hard work could transform everything. By 2011, Tina was a junior at Middle Tennessee State University, playing for the Lady Raiders. Her talent made her stand out, but so did her discipline. She lived with the weight of responsibility, determined never to let her family, or herself, down. She had big dreams: to graduate, to continue her basketball journey, and to make a life that would inspire those back home in Memphis. But while Tina's star was rising, the shadows around her were beginning to grow. Because in the apartment she called home, her story was about colliding with someone who saw the world very differently. While Tina Stewart was chasing her basketball dreams, another young woman was beginning her own journey at Middle Tennessee State University. Her name was Shanterica Madden. Shanterica was a freshman, also from Memphis. Unlike Tina, she wasn't an athlete. She came to Murfreesboro for her studies, looking for independence and a fresh start. To many, she appeared like any other college student, navigating new freedoms, adapting to shared spaces, and trying to fit into an unfamiliar world. But inside their shared apartment, the differences between the two young women became clear. Tina, the disciplined athlete, lived with structure: practice, classes, curfews, responsibility. Shanterica, by contrast, sought the ease of college life, a chance to enjoy her new freedoms. Those worlds collided in ways neither could escape. The small cracks in their roommate relationship began with everyday disputes, over visitors, over lifestyle, over boundaries. But the biggest fracture came from one thing Tina could never ignore: Shanterica's habit of smoking inside the apartment. For Tina, a basketball scholarship was everything. One report, one bad decision could threaten her future. For Shanterica, it was her personal space, her choice. And slowly, resentment started to grow. Two young women, two different paths, and one small apartment that was becoming a pressure cooker. Neither knew it yet, but the walls around them were closing in. And soon their clash would end in tragedy. It was a Wednesday in Murfreesboro. For most students at Middle Tennessee State University, March 2nd was just another day. Classes, practices, homework. But inside apartment C201 at Raiders Crossing, tension that had been simmering for weeks was about to boil over. That afternoon, Tina Stewart confronted her roommate Shanterica Madden about something she could no longer ignore. Madden had been smoking marijuana inside the apartment. For Tina, this wasn't just about a smell in the air, it was about her future. One complaint, one violation could put her basketball scholarship at risk. For Tina, her scholarship wasn't just money. It was her life's work, her family's hope, her only way forward. Earlier that day, Tina had called the apartment's courtesy officer, reporting the incident. To Madden, that was a betrayal. To Tina, it was the only way to protect everything she had built. Their disagreement was no longer just about rules. It has become personal. What began as words soon escalated. Shanterica Madden, angry and defensive, lashed out. Tina, the athlete, the fighter, stood her ground. Neighbors later reported hearing the argument through the walls. What no one could have known at that moment was that the shouting match in apartment C201 would never be just an argument. Because in a matter of minutes, anger would give way to violence. And what started as a dispute between roommates would end in a tragedy that shocked an entire community. The shouting in apartment C201 grew more heated. Words flew like daggers. Tina, the disciplined athlete, furious at the risk her roommate had created. Shanterica Madden, defensive, feeling cornered and betrayed. Their anger was no longer about smoking. It was about power, about control, about respect. The fight escalated. In the heat of the argument, Madden stormed toward the kitchen. And there she grabbed what would turn their feud into tragedy, a steak knife. What happened next unfolded in seconds. Tina fought back, the athlete in her refusing to back down. But in the chaos, the blade found its mark. A single, devastating thrust to Tina's chest. The knife pierced her aorta. An injury no young woman could survive. Neighbors would later recall hearing a cry, then silence. Moments later, Tina Stewart, just 21 years old, full of dreams and determination, lay on the floor of her apartment, bleeding heavily, fighting for her life. Her boyfriend, Casey Anunu, arrived in time to find her gasping for air, blood soaking through her clothes. His desperate call to 911 echoed with terror. Tina was slipping away and nothing he did could stop it. By the time first responders arrived, it was too late. In the very place she should have felt safe, Tina Stewart's life had ended. One single moment of rage had stolen everything. From her family, her teammates, and from a young woman who had worked her whole life to rise above the odds. The apartment that night was eerily quiet. The walls, once filled with the chatter of roommates, now absorbed the weight of a violent act. Tina Stewart's body lay lifeless on the floor of her Murfreesboro apartment, and Shanterica Madden stood over her, trembling. The reality of what had just happened crashed down like a tidal wave. Fear surged through her veins. Instead of dialing 911, instead of seeking help, she reached for a towel, trying to wipe away the blood. Every movement was frantic, clumsy, as though scrubbing could erase the irreversible. She rushed around the apartment, hiding the knife, shoving items aside, fumbling with thoughts of what to do next. Shanterica's mind raced. She texted friends, trying to spin a story, grasping at alibis that might save her from the truth. But the panic bled through every word, every call. Neighbors later recalled hearing muffled cries, the sound of hurried movement, and then silence. Hours later, as the minutes turned to a haze of dread, Shanterica's fear of discovery only deepened. When the police arrived, tipped off by concerned friends who hadn't heard from Tina, they walked into a scene that was anything but random. Tina's body lay there, and the signs of a struggle spoke louder than any attempt to hide them. Still, Shantarika tried to weave her tale. She claimed she acted in self-defense, painting Tina as the aggressor. But the crime scene told another story. The blood stains, the defensive wounds on Tina, the sheer brutality of the act. Nothing aligned with Shantarika's desperate words. Her cover-up was crumbling. And with each inconsistency, each contradiction, investigators grew certain. This was not self-defense. This was murder. Viewers, imagine being in that apartment, knowing a life had been taken, watching as someone tried to cover their tracks. This is the chilling reality of true crime. The lies, the panic, the unraveling. Don't miss what comes next. Subscribe now to Unraveling Crimes, because if you don't, you may never hear the truth behind how this story unfolded. When police entered the Murfreesboro apartment that night, the air was heavy. It wasn't just the sight of Tina Stewart's body. It was the stillness, the eerie quiet that lingered after chaos. Officers immediately noticed the signs. Overturned items, blood smeared in places where someone had tried, unsuccessfully, to wipe it away. Detectives quickly separated witnesses. Neighbors had reported hearing an argument earlier in the evening, raised voices, the sound of struggle. But the biggest lead wasn't from the apartment. It was standing right there, trembling, trying to explain it all away. Shantarika Madden. From the very first words out of her mouth, detectives sensed her story didn't line up. She insisted Tina had attacked her first, forcing her to defend herself. Tina's injuries suggested otherwise. Deep stab wounds, including fatal ones to her chest, told the story of someone overpowered, not an attacker in control. The investigators pressed harder. Why were there signs of attempted cleanup? Why had the weapon been moved? Why didn't her explanation match the evidence? Each question cornered Shantarika further. Her alibi cracked. Her voice faltered. The calm she tried to hold shattered. Within hours, detectives had what they needed. The inconsistencies, the physical evidence, and the chilling brutality of Tina's wounds pointed to one conclusion. This wasn't self-defense. This was murder. On March 3, 2011, just one day after Tina Stewart's life was cut short, Shantarika Madden was placed under arrest for first-degree murder. As the cuffs clicked around her wrists, her life, like Tina's, was forever changed. And yet, this was only the beginning. The arrest wasn't the end of the story. It was the start of a battle in court. A fight for truth. A fight for justice. A fight to uncover the real reason why a promising college athlete was taken far too soon. What happens when a courtroom becomes the stage for betrayal, jealousy, and deadly secrets? Stay with us. Because in Act 7, the trial reveals everything. Subscribe now or risk missing the moment when the truth finally comes to light. The trial of Shantarika Madden began in 2012, just 1 year after the brutal killing of Tina Stewart. The courtroom was packed. Family, friends, fellow students, reporters. Everyone came searching for answers. Everyone wanted justice. At the center of it all was Shantarika. Just 19 years old, her face told a story of fear, but her fate depended on whether the jury believed her words, or the evidence stacked against her. Prosecutors painted Shantarika as a jealous, angry roommate whose resentment toward Tina had been building for weeks. They called witnesses, neighbors who had heard shouting that night, investigators who described the crime scene, and medical experts who testified about Tina's wounds. The autopsy revealed the truth in brutal detail. Tina had been stabbed multiple times, with the fatal wound piercing her chest. The pattern of the wounds, prosecutors argued, showed not self-defense but rage. Then came the most damning piece: the attempted cleanup. Blood stains wiped, the knife hidden. These actions spoke volumes. Prosecutors asked the jury a chilling question. If this was truly self-defense, why hide it? Why try to erase the truth? But Shantarika's attorneys fought back. They insisted she was no killer by choice, just a terrified teenager who acted in panic. They argued Tina was the aggressor, that she had cornered Shantarika, and that the stabbing was an accident during the struggle. Shantarika herself took the stand, her voice trembling as she recounted her version of that night. She described fear. She described chaos. She claimed she never meant for Tina to die. The courtroom was split. On one side, a grieving family demanding justice. On the other, a young woman insisted she was no murderer. For days, the jury wrestled with one haunting question. Was this a cold-blooded killing, or a panicked act of survival gone horribly wrong? The tension reached its peak as closing arguments echoed through the courtroom. The prosecution demanded accountability. The defense pleaded for mercy. The gavel fell and the jury was sent away to deliberate. For hours, silence. The weight of justice hung heavy in the air. Families held their breath. Lives were suspended, waiting for 12 strangers to decide the future. And then, the jury returned. Their verdict would seal Shantarika's fate. The courtroom was heavy with silence when the jury filed back in after hours of deliberation. On the edge of their seats sat two families, one grieving the loss of a daughter who would never return, the other praying for mercy for a young woman whose life now hung in the balance. When the foreman stood, the words pierced the room like a knife. We, the jury, find the defendant, Shantarika Madden, guilty of second-degree murder. Gasps filled the courtroom. Tina Stewart's family clutched one another, tears flowing, not of joy but of a solemn relief that justice had been served. Shantarika's mother broke down, wailing at the thought of her daughter spending decades behind bars. The sentence soon followed, 25 years in prison. For many, the verdict was bittersweet. Tina's life could never be restored. Her laughter, her energy, her basketball dreams, all silenced. But at least for her parents, there was acknowledgement that her death mattered, that her killer was held accountable. In the aftermath, Murfreesboro and the Middle Tennessee State University community struggled to process the tragedy. Vigils were held on campus, candles lighting up the night in Tina's memory. Her teammates wore her number in tribute, and her absence left an irreplaceable void on the court and in their hearts. As for Shantarika, prison became her reality, a constant reminder of one heated night that forever destroyed two lives. The girl who once dreamed of graduating now faced the prospect of middle age before tasting freedom again. And so, the story of Tina Stewart ends not just as a true crime case, but as a haunting reminder of how quickly lives can unravel. A roommate quarrel turned into a deadly clash. A moment of rage turned into a lifetime of regret. In the end, there were no winners, only loss. A family lost a daughter, a community lost a bright light, and another young woman lost her future. Tina Stewart's story lingers because it forces us to ask, how do ordinary moments spiral into irreversible tragedy? Her name, though, continues to be spoken, not only as a victim of a senseless crime, but as a symbol of promise, of potential cut short, and of the fragile line between conflict and catastrophe. Kindly subscribe to Unraveling Crimes for more stories.